Hi, everybody, and very welcome to the Green Schools Festival of Energy 2025. My name is Rob Nelson, and I am the Green Schools Energy Team Coordinator. I'd like to say a very important thank you to EirGrid, our new energy team sponsor. Without EirGrid, we wouldn't be able to put on events like this Festival of Energy, celebrating energy across the week, or any of our regional workshops that we did during the year. We were very lucky to have EirGrid on board as our partner, and we launched the energy team again recently at the start of the year, and there's a picture there of our launch with St. Mark's in Tala in January. And you can see in their hands, they have little light bulbs, and there are energy pledges. And we actually have a video going out on our website today on how you can make your own energy pledge like that for your school. So have a look at that. We have it going out in Irish again on Friday as well. So for any of our Gael schools, you'll be able to learn how to do that as Gaeilge. Firstly, I would just like to play a little video from EirGrid telling us all about what they do and their sponsorship partnership with us this year.
Hello everyone, it's great to welcome you all to the Green Schools Energy Festival 2025. I'm delighted to welcome you to this exciting festival, all about energy. We are going to learn about how energy is made, how it travels to our homes and schools, and how we can use it wisely to help our planet. But first, let me tell you about EirGrid. EirGrid makes sure electricity moves safely and smoothly all around Ireland. Imagine a network of motorways connecting power stations where electricity is made to houses, schools and hospitals. EirGrid helps manage that network, making sure that the lights can stay on and that you have the power you need every day of the week. How that power is made has a big part to play in supporting Ireland's climate action efforts. We need to bring renewable energy sources, such as wind and solar, onto the electricity grid. And to do this, we need to make some big changes to make sure we have a strong grid for future generations, so that everyone can have access to clean energy. You'll hear more about this throughout the festival. The Green Schools team has lots of fun activities in store and great things to discover, and so ask lots of questions, get involved, and most of all, enjoy the day. Hello everyone.
So as I said, we have a packed week full of interesting webinars on all things energy, and that will start with one of our speakers from EirGrid, John Ging, who is the head of interconnection, and we'll introduce him properly now in a minute, and he can start telling us all about the wonderful things that EirGrid does for the country. But we have a week-long festival going on. So today it's the EirGrid talk. Tomorrow we will have a talk from myself, a brief history of energy. Wednesday we have a speaker from Capital Power telling us all about solar power. Thursday we have Marcus Byrne from Wind Energy Ireland telling us about wind energy. On Thursday we also have a careers talk for our secondary school students as well. And on Friday, we have our Irish language officer, Maeve, tell us all about energy as Gaeilge. So it should be a really interesting talk there on that day. We also have some upcoming videos we'll be releasing daily. Create with Rob videos, starting with our energy pledge, so you can learn how to make that light bulb that we saw in the first picture. And doing things like a static jump, an elastic powered car, a prop pop propeller, and then we'll have on Friday, we'll release our energy pledge video as Gaeilge translated, so you can learn how to do that as Gaeilge. And some of our upcoming downloads include today we're releasing our energy vampire hunt, so a refurbished version of an old resource that we had with Green Schools. We'll have a static electricity worksheet, light worksheet, learning about lux meters, a post-primary version of the standby worksheet, and we'll also have online quizzes, hopefully as Gaeilge and in English as well. So some great things to look forward to going forward. And but first, today we're going to introduce you to John. And John is from EirGrid. As I said, he's the head of interconnection with EirGrid, and he's going to tell us all about the wonderful things that EirGrid do with energy.
So that works from everything from designing the power system of the future, looking at how we can connect more green energy, whether it be wind or solar, onshore or offshore onto the grid, some of the engineering challenges that go along with that. I also worked in kind of developing and testing IT systems because EirGrid are responsible for the grid development and the operation of the grid, but we also run a thing called the single electricity market. So the SEMO, or single electricity market operator, is part of EirGrid Group, one of the many companies within EirGrid Group. And I was involved in the previous testing for the new market before it went live in 2018. I've also had the fortune to work in the National Control Centre to keep the lights on, literally and figuratively. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I took some time working on non-engineering stuff. So some audits and rules and regulations and compliance. So kind of more legal and regulatory world, which is quite interesting for somebody who doesn't really have that background. You can do anything in EirGrid. So it's really important, because it's one thing to solve engineering puzzles. It's another thing to actually solve the rules that work around them. So,
John,
and then more recently,
we might stop you there for a sec. Could you stop sharing and share your slides again? Just they seem to
sure,
have jammed there. Sorry.
I will absolutely do that. So share screen. So they come true. Am I on screen two? No, I'm
Yeah,
on screen one again.
we can see the slides.
Okay, so screen two should be up now, or yeah, hopefully there now. Grant. So as I said, I am now responsible for interconnecting, and I'd imagine a lot of people on the call are probably wondering what's an interconnector. An interconnector is basically a wire that goes from Ireland to somewhere else. So currently we have wires between Ireland and Wales, and we are soon building a new wire between Ireland and France, and I'm responsible for making sure that they work, looking after the engineering of that wire and the market. So making sure that the electricity prices associated with Ireland becomes cheaper because of access to electricity in Great Britain or in France. So that is who I am. Who are EirGrid? You're probably all aware of who ESB are. You've probably all seen lots of wind turbines and solar plants, and even some maybe large generators around the country. So they are not EirGrid. So what are EirGrid? Basically, generation companies create electricity through harnessing the wind or the sun or water at Ardnacrusha on the Shannon, or on the Erne or the Lee or the Liffey. There's certain water generation stations, and also there are big gas turbines and coal turbines around the country. So those generation companies need to transfer their electricity from where it's created to our homes and businesses and schools and shops, etc. So EirGrid's job is to make sure that that can happen. ESB's job is to look after the small towns and villages and make sure that the power flows into everyone's houses and schools, but EirGrid makes sure that it can flow from where it's generated through to the small towns and villages, and eventually through to our homes and businesses. So we basically look after the high voltage transmission grid. So that's the really big stuff. When you look around the countryside, you see massive steel lattice uh, steel towers like this one in the screen with the little cow. That would be what EirGrid looks after. The smaller wooden pole sets, where there might be only one pole with 2 or 3 wires on it, that is more ESB level. So that's kind of the difference in terms of the system that we operate. But in terms of what we actually do, I'm going to talk about Deirdre. So Deirdre here is in our National Control Centre. Her job is to keep the lights on. And she does that on a 24/7 basis with 8 of her other colleagues across 2 desks. So there's always 2 people in the room, and their job is to respond to the real life electricity system as they see it, making sure that the supply of generation always meets demand. And by doing so, that'll keep what's called the frequency at 50 hertz. Deirdre's job is to make sure that we are looked after for the next 24 to 48 hours, make sure that there is enough generators available, or if there isn't, to start ordering new plant to come online. So she might decide today that tomorrow the wind may not be blowing as much and it might be a darker day, so there might not be as much solar. So she will instead bring on a gas turbine or potentially even a coal plant. Now, we try not to bring on coal plants, but sometimes you have to do it when you've got no other options. So they look after that 365 days a year, or 366 days in a leap year, all hours of the day and night, to make sure that when you flick a switch to bring on a light, or you want to turn on a kettle, that you can do that, or take a shower, or do whatever. So she's constantly planning for what the electricity need might be in Ireland over the next 24 hours, and trying to make sure that you can manage to match that in advance. The tricky thing with electricity is that it can't really be stored in the same way as other goods and services can. Electricity tends to be used the second it's created, or almost the same second it's created. It travels at light speed, so really, really fast from A to B. So to manage that, it means that you need to have generators that can turn on and move up and down quite quickly to be able to keep the system at 50 hertz. So that's Deirdre's job and her team's job. They look after that throughout the day and night. And that's ultimately what EirGrid are about: system operations, making sure that the lights are on and that the market and that the power system stays up. We do not want a situation where there may be unavailability of power and a blackout situation. For example, in the recent storms, Storm Éowyn might have seen some people disconnected for the system for a number of days. What we can say at EirGrid is that the transmission system was quite strong and held together, but unfortunately at distribution system level, where the lines go out to the smaller towns and villages, that they may be more susceptible to high winds. They may not be as strong and resilient as the big steel lattices that we have. So some of those would have been knocked over. Some of them might have had trees falling against them, and meant that people were disconnected. So Deirdre and the team would make sure that they keep the big system alive so that ESB can continue to deliver as much power as possible and safely to electricity to homes and businesses around the country. So I'm just going to introduce the power system in Ireland now. So hopefully it moves on to the next slide. So in Ireland, we have 3 major load centres in Dublin, Belfast and Cork. Every town and village also has requirement for electricity, but they're the biggest consumers in the country. And we have a typical consumption across a year of about 40 terawatt hours. That's a lot, a really, really big number. But generally, our peak demand is about 7.5 gigawatts. And anyone who can remember Back to the Future and the DeLorean and how they send the car back and forward in time uses 1.21 gigawatts. So this is a big deal to create 7.5 gigawatts. It's a lot of energy. The minimum demand, which happens at night time in the summertime when you don't need as much electricity, is about 2 gigawatts. So at any point in time, we need between 2 and 7.5 gigawatts online in Ireland. As I said, we look after the high voltage lines in EirGrid. So we look after the 400 kV lines, which are the really high voltage lines. And they were built back in the 1980s, connecting from Clare, in Moneypoint in Clare, where there's a coal plant, up to Dublin. And then we started to build 220 kV lines just underneath that. So these are the super highways of the grid. They're a figure of 8 around Ireland. They connect all the major counties together and the big load centres together. If you think of it in terms of roadways, they're like the motorways of the grid. And the red ones, I suppose, are like the 3-lane motorways, and the green ones are like the 2-lane motorways. We also have a lot, about 5,000 kilometers of 110 kV lines. So these can be either wooden pole sets or steel towers that you might see around the countryside. But the way you'll know that they're transmission level rather than distribution level, so EirGrid's ones, is that there'll be 3 wires and possibly 2 more at a higher level. For the distribution level, there tends to be only 2 wires, or 2 wires at the same level and maybe 1 above it. So that's EirGrid's transmission grid, and we're always trying to develop and improve upon that. Then Sony, our sister company in Northern Ireland, has a similar grid, but it uses different voltage levels because it's part of the UK. So it uses 275 kV and 110 kV, and we won't talk too much more about them. Then I suppose we have 3 interconnectors. So that's what I look after between Ireland and Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland. And they're all half a gigawatt each. And we also have an upcoming interconnector called Celtic that we're building with our colleagues in France, a place called RTE, which is a different RTE, that are the same as EirGrid, in that they operate their power system and control their generation. As I said, it was about 7.5 gigawatts of installed conventional plants. So that's your coal plant, your gas plant, mostly gas, I have to say, very small amount of coal. And by the end of the year, we hope to have no more coal on the system. That's not a promise I can make, but I'm hoping it'll happen. We also have some hydro on the grid, about 0.5 gigawatt of that. And then we have a lot of installed wind, 5.5 gigawatts. And you can see all the little green dots around the system. They are where all the wind farms are currently. And you can see that most of them tend to be on the west coast, either in Cork or Kerry, in Mayo, Galway, Donegal, primarily because a lot of the wind lands in on the west coast first and then transfers across the system. So they're the best places to locate wind turbines. So you can see we can actually have enough at times between the hydro and the installed wind, and more recently the installed solar. So there is solar capturing the energy from the sun, that we could actually meet all of our demand from renewable power at the moment. But there is physical constraints due to the laws of physics that prevent us from doing that just now. But by the end of the decade, we hope to be able to do that on a regular basis. And then there are batteries. I did say that you can't really store electricity in the same way, and that's true. What you do in terms of batteries and pump storage is you actually harness that electricity and transform it into another form. So it becomes an electrical charge, or it becomes water pumped to the top of a hill that you can release and let drop back down the hill, which generates electricity as it flows down the hill again. So that's the all-island power system, and it's constantly changing throughout the day. We need different levels of wind and solar generation to meet the demand. As we get up in the morning, the electricity demand tends to be quite high. It tends to level off around lunchtime and then gets high again in the evening time as we all go home and have our dinner. And then overnight, it's a lot less because we all go to bed. So here's a snapshot of what it looked like yesterday. As I said, we had a little bit of coal online, but it was mostly gas, about 40%. And you can see gas and renewables are quite matched. So wind and solar were quite good yesterday, also about 40%. And then the rest was tended to be imported from Great Britain on the 3 interconnectors that are there right now. So we do have that lovely mix of generation. We're hoping that by 2030, so just 5 years away, that change or that mix will change from where we are today with 40% renewables up to 80% renewables, or maybe even 100% renewables at specific times. And we're working really hard to be able to deliver that. So obviously, as I said, weather and electricity are interrelated. On a cold day, we need more electricity. We want to heat our houses. We want to keep ourselves warm. We might be indoors more, so we're using our television or our laptops more, so that uses more electricity. On a hot day, we tend to not use as much. We're not using as much air conditioning in our schools and homes and hospitals. We aren't really as I suppose as dependent on, and then we're able to use some of the renewables such as the sun and the wind to be able to help meeting those. So we're always trying to forecast what tomorrow looks like. So in as much as we're forecasting what the demand is to make sure we have enough generation, we're trying to figure out how much of that will be met by renewable generation such as wind or solar or hydro. So it is very, very interesting when you see a dark cloudy day where there's no wind, because on those days it tends to be a bit colder and you're trying to find generation to be able to meet it. But on a hot sunny day, you might have too much generation and you may have to find some way to relieve ourselves of that generation. So some of it is stored in batteries or pump storage, but the rest of it we can export to Europe and make money for Ireland, so that we're able to use more of the renewables and be able to do a good deed as European citizens. So government are hoping that by 2030, as I said, that we're going to have 80% of our needs met by renewable sources. They will be onshore and offshore. So currently, a lot of our renewable sources are onshore, purely because it is cost effective. Onshore, it's very easy to build a turbine or to install a solar park because you can drive up to it. You can put it up quite straightforwardly. Offshore, you need to procure a boat and get that boat into the water. It needs to have special cranes to be able to lift heavy wind turbines and to be able to put them on top of the water, make sure that they don't fall over in storms, and that they're there and available. But the technology is there, and anyone who's been to Europe, especially Denmark, might have seen offshore wind turbines as they land at the airport, or anyone who's flown south will have seen massive amounts of solar parks in Spain and France and places like that, where they're able to build new ways of connecting to allow for this 80% renewable by 2030. So the big problem for us right now is we're trying to connect all these new renewables, but also there's loads more people in Ireland these days, and loads more people equals loads more services required. So things like data centers to be able to watch Netflix, to be able to have Zoom calls, to be able to actually do your work from your house rather than from your office or from your school, means that you need more electricity going forward. And we're trying to develop the grid because we need about 17 gigawatts more renewable electricity by 2030, because we need more electricity to meet our demands. We're using more, so we need to generate more. So as I said, we were about 7 gigawatts last year in terms of our peak demand. To go to 17, we're almost tripling the size of our power system, actually a little bit more than tripling the size of our power system in just 5 years. So we have to work really hard to be able to deliver that. And the big question, and the one for, I suppose, all of you guys, is how do we bring more renewables onto the grid? How do we in 2030 be able to connect more renewables? Obviously, we know that it can go in windy locations or in solar locations, whether that be on land or at sea. That doesn't really matter because you will find a place to put it. But how do you connect it so that it can bring the power from where it's generated to where it's needed? We probably need to build a lot more grid to be able to do that, or come up with other creative solutions. That might mean new circuits, so new 110, 220 or 400 kV circuits, typically overhead, because underground creates electrical challenges for safety issues, for cost issues, but also for being able to manage those underground cables. They tend to be okay at short distances, but as you go longer distances, they introduce problems for the grid to be able to manage and could cause blackouts if they're not managed correctly. So generally, we try to go overhead where we can, even though you can have issues with overhead lines in storms, lightning strikes, things like that. It generally tends to be more beneficial that you have overhead lines, that you can get them connected faster. But there is a blend. You can have both overhead and underground. And then obviously, if the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine on a given day, you need to have backups, and hopefully our batteries and storage will be able to help us there. But also you need to be able to rely on fast acting gas turbines or other very clean gas turbines, nuclear from France perhaps, to be able to assist us on those days where the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. But the question is, how do we get more renewable energy onto the grid? What kind of creative solutions can we come up with? And I'm sure you guys will be all thinking about those all the time and trying to work it out. It's how can we connect new circuits? How can we connect more generation? Where should we connect the generation? Should it be closer to where it's needed so you don't need to build as much new circuits? But how can you do that? Lots of really complex challenges. And as I said, I love solving puzzles. I'm sure you do too. So that's the ask. As I said, we are looking further offshore as well as onshore. So this is going to be a more familiar site in the future as we connect more offshore. EirGrid will be looking after this big platform in the middle of the sea, and the turbines will be owned by the turbine or the generation companies. They will connect onto this platform, and then we will take it from there onshore to where it's needed in our homes and businesses. So that will be EirGrid's future role as the offshore transmission system operator and owner. The other thing, as I mentioned, we are building a Celtic interconnector between Ireland and France. So this is my pet project that I'm looking after in terms of making sure that when the interconnector is connected, that we can make that interconnector be controlled from our national control center, and also that it works in terms of the Irish and European markets. So there's a massive project underway at the moment to build the cable between Ireland and France. It's 575 kilometers long, which is really, really long, one of the longest in the world. It'll be 700 megawatts, so 10% of our power system could be met from that cable alone when it goes live in a little under 2 years' time. So it's a really exciting project connecting into the northwest of France and into Cork in Ireland. So working really hard on that. It brings a lot of benefits, not just in terms of bringing us closer as European neighbours with France and our low carbon future, but it also strengthens our security of supply. As I mentioned, on the day that the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, we can rely on France to help us. And on days where we have too much wind and solar, we can help them out if they don't have enough. So it's a real opportunity. And then I suppose this is just a little view of what's happening on the project at the moment. So we're really working hard at sea right now in terms of trying to connect the two power systems together. We're putting that cable into the water. So we're working at the kind of the beaches right now in terms of making it ready for the cable to be able to be laid later on this year and early next year. So there's a lot happening both in France and in East Cork to be able to deliver on that. And then looking out, we'll have one of these boats in the water very soon. The current one there is the detector. So it's actually mapping the marine floor, so the seabed, to make sure that there's sufficient rocks that we can bury the cable underneath and keep it safe so that it's available and doesn't get hit by people if they drop an anchor while they're trying to steady their ship, or if they're fishing, or if they're scuba diving or whatever, that they don't inadvertently interfere with the cable. So we have to make sure that it's buried safely under rocks. The cables are quite big and heavy, so they need special ships to be able to bring them out and lay them at sea. But when they get laid, they'll hopefully be there for the next 100 years and be able to deliver that low cost electricity and market integration for Ireland and France going forward. So what does that really mean for Ireland? As I said, it means more renewable electricity going forward. It means that we'll be able to hopefully reduce our air pollution and reach our climate targets, makes us more energy independent. So yes, we have interconnectors that allow us to be able to operate and share excess, but also to be able to depend on our friends and neighbours in Great Britain and in France when we need it. But if we have more renewables on the system, we can rely on our wind and solar to look after our own needs first, and only rely on the interconnectors with others when we absolutely necessarily have to, which means that hopefully the cost of electricity will come down. And ultimately, it means more puzzles to be solved, which means more jobs for us. And it means that, there'll be more investment in Ireland and looking after our future going forward. So I think that's all of my slides. So if there's any questions, I'm open to hopefully trying to solve or answer one or two of them.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, John. It was enlightening. And I just said in the chat there that we might share on the slides afterwards. There was a tiny bit of a lag, so some of the slides can overlap. So we can you can stop sharing and we can open up for questions now. I'm going to stop recording. But just before I stop recording, I'm conscious of that boat that you shared at the end. I had a talk there down in Cork with one of the people involved, and they were saying that the coil and for the wire and all had to be pre-made somewhere else and specifically made for that project, which I think is quite an interesting thing. So there's a big it's you're designing the whole structure, not just the cable going across, but you have to design the thing that's laying it as well. And I think it's an
Absolutely.
interesting thing.
Yeah. And that was actually one of the interesting challenges on the previous interconnector that we worked on in the EirGrid, the East-West interconnector. At the time, it was in the recession, so in 2008 to 2012, and the cost of copper actually became a little bit cheaper. So copper is typically a very good conductor to connect electricity from one place to another. But generally, people use aluminium because it's cheaper, but copper became slightly cheaper. And because of the size of copper will carry more electricity. If it's a small piece of copper, will carry more than a bigger piece of aluminium. And we were able to use a copper cable instead of an aluminium cable. And that meant that we could fit more of it on the boat, which meant we needed fewer boats. So the cost of the project came down because overall, you only needed the boat for a shorter amount of time. And it all goes down to engineering of the boat, the delivery, and then what actually ends up in the ground as well. So it's fascinating.